I continue my commentary of the Zizek-Peterson debate, which occurred in 2019. I will put the link to the first two videos. And I continue where I stopped in a previous video, which is in the middle of Peterson's speech. And he talks about Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels and says that they praised capitalism for its effectiveness in producing wealth. And Marx and Engels were the negative of capitalism, but they acknowledged the creative strength of capitalism. And in the realm of Hegel's logic, in the pure abstract mind of God, the negative is that which brings forth all the logical determinations by logically proving that all finite categories are unable to grasp the infinite. And that's why in the realm of Hegel's logic, the logical idea, which is a self-completed logical totality, which contains within itself all the determinations of thought, all the laws of thought, is self-moving because it has the negative within itself. And what brings forth the wealth, the logical wealth of logical determinations, is the negative moment. So that's a kind of ambiguous. Yeah. Capitalism produces inequalities and exploitation, but at the same time, if we adopt a historical perspective, since the introduction of capitalism and modern industrial and economic life, the human population has been multiplied by 7, and the standards of living in the West, but in the world at large, have tremendously increased. And the capitalists often acknowledge this fact, which is difficult to accept because capitalism brought disruption and exploitation, but at the same time it brought billions of human beings into being through better standards of living, better health conditions, better organization of the work, the productive forces of work. So that's kind of ambiguous, and Marx and Engels in the middle of the 19th century already understood that. So now, in the 46th minute of the debate, Zizek comes onto the stage and he says that Peterson and I are the duel of the century, or the debate of the century. And if we try to adopt the view of an ancient Greek of the 6th century BCE, this debate between Peterson and Zizek would be the equivalent of a debate on the internet or on television, if the Greeks had it, between Heraclitus and Democritus. And Zizek would be the laughing materialist, which is Democritus, and Peterson would be the tragic, speculative thinker. And the fact that this interaction between two great minds is made available to those who have the interest and the possibility of accessing knowledge and the internet is a gift from God. And Zizek complains about the fact that he's being marginalized by the official academic community. And Zizek, like Peterson, is a tormented figure because he is standing between the left liberals who reject him for his politically incorrect stances on many topics, and the neoconservatives, which, as some sort of a communist, he rejects. So, yeah. He says that China is the greatest economic success ever, that they developed from poverty to middle class status in a matter of a few decades. That China mixes together a strong authoritarian state with wild capitalist dynamic. And And then he mentions the Dalai Lama, who says that the purpose of life is the pursuit of happiness and the avoidance of pain. But as a psychoanalyst, he brings his own view to the question. He says that humans are very creative in sabotaging their pursuit of happiness. And if human beings are made in the image of God, which I believe they are, God is some sort of a self-sabotaging entity, because he brings negativity within himself and he makes himself suffer. So, yeah. The worst thing that can happen is to get what you officially desire. Yeah. He says that we should carry the burden because freedom is a burden. The idea of being responsible for one's own action and behavior means to bear the burden of the responsibility of the consequences of one's own action. And that's the reason why so many people do not like freedom, is because freedom is a heavy burden to carry. And freedom is so heavy that only God can carry the burden of freedom. And that's why only God is free, strictly speaking. Yeah. He talks about the search for higher values and transcendence. Then he talks about religion. He says that religion, in the ordinary view, make bad people do good things. So the positive aspect of religion is that it turns the bad into the good. He says that without religion, good people would do good things and bad people would do bad things. But only religion can make good people do bad things. He says that he quotes, I think, Dostoevsky, in a godless world, it's a world of moral nihilism, and if God does not exist, then everything is permitted. But he says in a very profound view that if God is real, then those who claim to speak in the name of God feel righteous in doing anything because they think that they act directly on behalf of God. So, yeah, that's a very ambiguous idea, because if you believe that you are driven by the Spirit of God, you are willing to justify your actions in the name of a higher principle. And yeah. He says that the Stalinists envision themselves as the carriers or the agents of world historical progress, and that there's a Marxist thinker, I think it's Georgi Lukács, who believed that Stalin was the world soul. Hegel supposedly said that Napoleon was the world spirit on horseback, and Lukács, as a Hegelian, believed that Stalin was the world spirit or the world soul embodied in an individual. And the communist leaders believed that they were entitled and allowed to bring destruction because they were inspired by a higher purpose, and that they were the agents of world historical consciousness, which in their view had to advance towards the advent of communism. He says that we should carry our burden and accept the suffering that goes with it. And then in a very dialectical fashion, he says that the renunciation of pleasure can turn into the pleasure of renunciation. That's a very profound idea, because secretly, on a deep psychoanalytical level, there is pleasure in self-renunciation. And the modern example are the liberal leftists who negate themselves morally by claiming how wrong they are as whites. And studies show that when they virtue signal and when they claim on the public sphere that they are evil, that because they are white they are privileged, and that their ancestors are monsters, and that they are the cause of all suffering. Chemicals are released within their brain, and they enjoy rushes of pleasure. So what is true on a psychoanalytical level is true on a biochemical level. So yeah. He says that self-denigration brings a profit of its own. He mentions the leftists who love to denigrate their own culture and their own people, and to blame Europeans and Eurocentrism for all the evils. So when the leftists claim that Europeans are evil, that whites are evil, they take pleasure in negating themselves. That's very profound. Yeah. They reserve, he talks about the leftist liberals, they reserve for themselves the universal position, and they graciously solicit others to assert their particular identity. So it's a Hegelian process. The liberal leftist, white liberals, they want to reach universality by negating the particular, and they believe that universality is the totality of all particulars. For instance, that mankind is Hispanics, blacks, Native Indians, Puerto Ricans, I'm talking about the United States, or whatever minorities, Asians, whatever. So they want to reach universality, which is the truth of man, by incorporating the addition of all particulars, but they negate their own particularity. So they hold the political power and the moral ground in the Western world, and they promote every particular group of people from an ethnic or religious position except their own. So they prevent their own particular group from asserting its own identity. So by claiming their virtue, they oppress the white worker, or the white middle class conservative, who would like any other human group and every other human being, to assert his own particular identity. So yeah. Yeah. He then mentions Jacques Lacan and the National Socialist. He says that most of the National Socialist claims about the Jews, that they exploit the Germans, that they seduce German girls, were wrong. That's his opinion. He mentions the anti-immigrants populist. From the point of view of God, since God is the totality of being, to be separated from God, to be differentiated from God, is to be in a negative position vis-a-vis God. So the negative, in the realm of speculative logic, is kind of God's refugee. He's the one in need of a home, and he would like to be accepted, but he faces refusal and rejection. So the political development of modern Western life is kind of a mirror image of the logical process of God's own development. That's very complex, but yeah. Then he talks about Hitler as being one of the greatest storytellers of the 20th century. His story consisted in talking about the Jewish plot, and we are in this mess, according to him, because of the Jews. And there's kind of an ambiguity, because Zizek, although he's a communist and he's an anti-Nazi like everyone, but he acknowledges that there was, how should I explain this? There was certain qualities in Hitler, in the sense that he was charismatic and he was a great orator. He spoke well, and that's, well, everyone knows this is because he had such a powerful impact upon the masses that he was able to impose his will onto his people, and yeah. He says that an enemy is someone whose story you haven't heard. He doesn't believe this, but from a Hegelian perspective, that's partly true, because if one was capable of fully understanding in all its logical, natural, and spiritual determinations an other, one would fall in rational love, what Spinoza calls Amor intellectualis Dei, with the other, because love from a Platonic but also Hegelian and Spinozian standpoint is conceptual understanding of the other. So yeah, and the reason why people sometimes say that God is love is because God, in his highest form, understands absolutely everything, and he's absolute knowing of the totality of being. So that's why God, in his purest form, loves everything, because he understands everything. And yeah, he talks about the alt-right's obsession with cultural Marxism, and but it was not really me, it was the zeitgeist, coined the term cultural Hegelianism when I was in a right-wing phase, and I believed, because I was foolish, that Hegel would become a right-winger, because I vaguely understood that Hegel was not the German philosopher of the 19th century, but it was the process of historical development, and that after having been a left-winger for many decades, Hegel would come back as a right-winger. I did not understand that Hegel was beyond opposites, and this speculative unity of opposites, this is precisely Hegel. So I believe that cultural Hegelianism, as I envision it, was the dialectical response to cultural Marxism, but I did not understood very well. Yeah. He talks about the alt-right view of cultural Marxism, that there is a plot to bring about moral degradation, sexual promiscuity, consumerist hedonism. This plot, in a dialectical fashion, brings about its own negation, and in the alt-right sphere, we witness the re-emergence, the establishment of moral virtue, sexual restraint, and the rejection of hedonism. So cultural Marxism, because it is a moment in the process of world spirit becoming conscious of itself, produces its own negative. That's very complex, but in my view, there was Hegel, and then there was Marx, and Marxism failed and transformed into cultural Marxism. And cultural Marxism must bring about its own negative, which I believe is cultural Hegelianism, but cultural Hegelianism must be the negative of the negative, which means it must include within itself all the negative moments which have made it come into being. So cultural Hegelianism is much more complicated than just a a dialectical refutation of cultural Marxism. It's to be honest, I am promoting a philosophy which I myself do not understand. So that's kind of a dangerous thing to do, but one must accept taking risks in life. Otherwise, yeah. He says that evil resides in the gaze which sees evil everywhere. That's a quote from Hegel. And Nietzsche says exactly the same thing. And yeah. I wrote that God is afraid of himself because if God is being, God is all there is. And God can only be afraid of himself because there's nothing which is not God. So God is kind of a pathetic being in a sense that there is, how should I explain this? That man should have a compassion for God, which is kind of ironic, because God is afraid of himself. And the reason why there is fear within humans is because they are made in the image of God, and God is afraid of himself. And when one understands this, that's very, very frightening, because if God is afraid, then who will brings comfort to humans? That's I don't know. He says that DNA overlaps at a rate of 98% with the DNA of monkeys. And what differentiates monkeys from humans and some human groups from others is a purely quantitative difference, and quantity is that which can be changed in an indifferent way, in the sense that a quantitative difference is an indifferent difference. If you change the quantity of a thing, the being of the thing doesn't disappear up to a certain point, because no one would claim that there is no qualitative difference between a monkey and a human being. Although strictly speaking, the difference is only quantitative. It's just an example that quality is quantity, and the truth of both is measure. And the difference between monkeys and humans is a difference of measure. And the real difference between humans and monkeys and human groups is spiritual, that which is above nature. And yeah. Then he talks about French cuisine, and he explains how the greatest inventions of French gastronomy, French refined dishes and meals, have come about in a dialectical fashion by transforming failures into resounding successes. That's quite comical. He talks the example of some French cheese and champagne, which were unexpected results of of failures. So that's the reason why French cuisine is divine, because God is the entity which can bring about miracles out of failures. And I'm sorry, when I laugh, it's because I have great ideas. I can't prevent myself from laughing, because yeah. He says that sexual instincts are biologically determined, and that obstacles demand that they should be overcome in some sort of a metaphysical passion. And the philosophy of Hegel is the philosophy of a passionate overcoming of obstacles. One could define in a poetic fashion in this way. And Zizek understands Hegel so well that I don't understand why he doesn't understand Hegel really. I mean, how can he be an atheist knowing that he understands everything about Hegel? It's like Dawkins and Krauss, those atheists, thinkers, the atheist scientists, they understand everything about God except that God actually exists. So that's quite strange. But then he talks about T.S. Eliot, who says that a new work of art, when it is created, it gives meaning to all the works of art which have preceded it. And that's true of Hegel's philosophy. That the coming into being of a conceptual understanding of reality retroactively projects new meaning onto the chronological past. And the past becomes intelligible only in relation to the present understanding. That's a very Hegelian idea. He says that the same divine spark dwells in everyone. So why is he an atheist? I don't understand. I will stop there for now. I will continue. I'm in the middle of commenting Zizek's perspective within the debate, and I will work and comment as long as I can.